All right, so as a review for what we did yesterday, we had our silhouette books here that have the solid black fill of various tree shapes and various foliage shapes. We talked about coniferous and deciduous and focused more on deciduous trees because those are the trees that lose their leaves, and that's the type of forest that we have already started with our landscape. So when we were practicing, really wanted you guys to explore and experiment with the deciduous foliage. We used black only at first, and we watered it down. If you look closely at this, pretend like this yellow is not there. That was our second step. First step was just the black. And did a little bit of a cast shadow on the bottom. And what I asked you guys to do is to work on like different clumps of things rather than doing like a whole big fluffy tree that's all solid. I asked you to kind of try and do some various clumps of foliage. And each clump is going to have some highlights on it, which was our second step. I asked you to experiment with watering things down and having opaque paint versus watered down paint. So here I've got both. That's opaque, not been watered down, and then this has been watered down. So you can see that here. After we did these bushes, we then used a small brush and just did a few of some of the branches. The branches don't need to look perfect. They don't need to look amazing. What we're really focusing in this practice is on the foliage and the texture marks that we can get. I asked you guys also to experiment with different types of brushes and use those brushes to make different types of marks. And those brushes are up here on the front table. You may have found one that you really love when you were experimenting yesterday, and you can use that one today. I found that many students in yesterday's class period, they actually would do part of the tree with one brush and then they'd switch and they'd do another part of the tree with a different brush. And it ended up making some really beautiful definitions between the different types, like the different aspects of the foliage. So, you know, they would do like one brush that was over here and then another one that was here because this was a smaller texture and fluffier texture because it was further away. So they started employing those techniques that we've learned about atmospheric perspective that has more texture when it's closer to you, and they had more texture in the middle of these guys, and along the edges it was more fluffy. And I thought that was really cool how some of the students did that. We walked around in class yesterday and we looked to see what other people were doing. I had you reflect on some things that you would like to change about your own or add to your own or experiment with your own. Yesterday was really about play. We're taking that same idea of play and experimentation with what sort of marks that we can make, and we are adding it to what we're doing today. So here are some coniferous ones that I did. I did them both with a fan brush, and the marks that were made look different, even though they were done by the same brush, because I used a different part of the brush, a different motion in my arm when I was making them. So same brush, but two very different types of marks that are made. So really, there's so much that you guys can do with mark making. Level 1 was just the black. Level 2, which we started yesterday, was the light side. And if you want to mix a little bit of the yellow in with the white so it's visible, you can. We're painting on white paper, and so putting white on it can be kind of hard to see sometimes. So I did mix a tiny little bit of yellow in with this, and the yellow is this yellow ochre from here. So it's not like the bright yellow, it's a yellow ochre, which is a more unsaturated yellow. For today, we are going to be going to level 3. And these things are also listed on the whiteboard back there. So we've got 3 different things. Black, we've done. Light side, we've done. Unsaturated, saturated with the light side, that's what I'm going to show you today. So I'm going to start with the unsaturated. And I'm just going to use this extra paint as my palette, and I'm going to paint up here. Like that. Okay. So you can't really see my palette, but that's okay. You guys know how to load brushes, and Each time you load the brush, it may be a little bit different, which means the mark you make will be different, and that's great with foliage. The more natural, random, wild things that can happen with foliage, the kind of better it looks like, the more feeling and emotion can come out from it. So I'm gonna start with unsaturated first. And that's when you get the base of your tree, is with unsaturated. Just like we used black before, now we're gonna be using the unsaturated green. So I'm thinking about the texture, marks that are being made here, and my little bush things. Oh, that's a fun mark there. Okay. I'm also gonna do a coniferous tree as well, right next to it, so you can see what that would look like. Let me see. Okay. So with the coniferous tree, get just a little bit of where that trunk is going to be. A little longer there. So unsaturated goes first. Saturated comes next. And that goes in the body, like the center portion of all of your bushes. So I'm gonna let this one dry before I put anything on it. That's really wet right now. And if I were to paint on top of it, it would just end up being super, super mushy. This one, however, is dry, so I can work with that. I've loaded the saturated green on here. This was made using the ochre, yellow ochre, which is already kind of unsaturated, but the yellow ochre and cobalt blue. So that's how this green was made. And I'm going to just put that in the bulk of the center a little bit. I'm also changing my brush strokes a little bit as well. So that's the bulk of the center. Let's turn the lights. Let's see, that color isn't showing super well. I'll take some photos and post those as well. If you want to mix some white with it, so it shows up a little bit better, you can do that as well. Yep, too wet still. So that's like the bulk of the center. So if you guys think about, and those of you watching the video aren't gonna see what I'm doing, but those of you in the classroom can. So if you think about a tree that has branches, the branches go up in multiple different directions like this, okay? If you're drawing me as a tree, the branches that come out like this, that's the portion that's closer to you. Here, this hand is closer than this one. So right in here, that's the part that's gonna have the saturated to it, okay? If there's a bundle over here that you're gonna draw, this middle part of that bundle is closer to you than the further away bundle. So that middle part of it is gonna have a saturated color. Does that make sense to you guys that saw the visual? Okay, all right. So I'm gonna wait for this to dry a little bit. I do have hair dryers over there in the corner if you wanna hair dry anything. You can also, like, as you have your large sheet of clear, like white paper, do one tree, move on to the next, move on to the next, and then hopefully by the time you get back to the first, it will be dry and you can continue working on it. So to reiterate, step one was the unsaturated shape and body of the tree. Step two is that saturated, like fullness in the middle, okay? And then step three is the light side and dark side. So that's where we take the yellow here and we'll mix that with a little bit of the saturated so that it starts to get a little bit lighter. I'm gonna bring some of that in. And this is like light hitting the tree over here. Should probably pick up a different brush at this point, but it's all starting to look the same. If you lose your depth and you need to get some of the darkness back because you've gone over it too many times, like I have, just grab some of the unsaturated and bring that back in there. With my liner brush, I'm gonna just mix like a dark green. I do have the black and white up here. I didn't want you to put it on your palette yet because the white and the black are like extra additives that you can do at the end, based off of how you paint. So now I've got this here, and I can add in the tree trunk. Let's see, I'm gonna put a little bit one right there. Sometimes it can be helpful to scrape it away as well, because that actually makes a pretty fun mark like that. If you scrape away too much, it's very easy to go back in and to just put some more foliage on top. There we go. That looks a little bit better. So there is a tree. If I had used a different brush, I probably would have left some of the white of the paper showing through in some places. In the silhouettes in your books, you'll see there's spots where the white still shows through. That would be really nice in like a little section there or down there. In our actual paintings, we've got blue back behind, and we want some of that to be able to show through. So when you're filling it in, try to not fill the entire thing in solid. Have a little bit of that blue peek through in some places. You can use your palette knife to add, in some lines as well for trunks. And I don't want you to spend too much time making the trunks look perfect, because we have some great trunks already. And don't forget about cast shadows. So since my light side is coming here, my shadow is going to go down to the left. My shadow would go down to the left, down on that guy.